Imagine stepping into a grand Roman villa at the height of the empire, not as a distant observer, but as a guest quietly entering through tall wooden doors, where warm torchlight flickers against marble walls, and the soft echo of voices, laughter, and music drifts through long corridors, guiding you deeper inside. And as you move forward, you begin to realize that what is happening here is not chaotic or uncontrolled as modern imagination often suggests, but something far more structured, layered, and deeply connected to Roman culture, power, and social identity, where gatherings that included intimacy, indulgence, and performance were not simply about pleasure, but about status, control, and the careful display of wealth and influence in a society that valued image just as much as experience. In ancient Rome, social gatherings, especially among the elite, were highly organized events known as convivia, where invited guests would recline on couches arranged around low tables, eating, drinking, and engaging in long conversations that could last for hours, sometimes stretching late into the night. And while modern stories often exaggerate these gatherings into something purely wild or excessive, the reality was more complex, because these events followed clear social rules where who you invited, where they sat, how they behaved, and what they were offered all reflected your position in society, and any element of intimacy or entertainment was carefully woven into this structure, rather than existing separately from it. As you move further into this imagined space, you notice how everything feels intentional, from the arrangement of the room to the sequence of events unfolding throughout the evening, where food is served in courses, wine is mixed and diluted according to custom, and music plays softly in the background, creating an atmosphere that is both relaxed and controlled. And within this setting, entertainment becomes a key part of the experience, sometimes including dancers, musicians, or performers whose presence adds to the mood of the gathering. And in some cases, this entertainment could include suggestive or intimate elements, but even then, it remained part of a larger social performance rather than something separate or uncontrolled. One of the most important things to understand about these gatherings is that Roman society had very different ideas about relationships, privacy, and public behavior compared to modern expectations, where certain forms of intimacy were not always hidden or considered purely personal, but could exist within social spaces in ways that reflected hierarchy and power. And this does not mean that every gathering included extreme behavior, but rather that the boundaries between public and private were different, shaped by cultural norms that allowed for a wider range of expression within controlled environments. At the same time, these events were not equal experiences for everyone involved, because Roman society was deeply hierarchical, and this hierarchy was visible even within moments of leisure, where free citizens, elites, servants, and enslaved individuals all occupied very different roles within the same space. And this structure influenced how interactions took place, who had agency, and who was expected to perform or serve, making it important to understand that what might appear as freedom or indulgence on the surface was often tied to systems of control beneath it. As the evening continues, the atmosphere shifts gradually, not suddenly, where wine flows more freely. Conversations become looser, and the structured formality of the earlier hours softens into something more relaxed. And within this shift, different forms of entertainment may become more prominent, sometimes including performances that play with themes of desire, humor, or exaggeration, reflecting the Roman appreciation for spectacle and theatricality. And while some gatherings may have included more intimate elements, These were often shaped by the expectations of the host and the social dynamics of the group, rather than being the central focus of every event. What makes these Roman gatherings particularly fascinating is how they combined multiple layers of meaning into a single experience, where food, conversation, entertainment, and social interaction all worked together to create an environment that was both enjoyable and deeply symbolic, where every detail communicated something about status, taste, and identity, and where even moments of indulgence were part of a larger display rather than isolated acts. And as you sit quietly within this imagined scene, watching the flickering light, listening to the low hum of voices, and observing the careful balance between structure and relaxation, you begin to understand that these gatherings were not simply about excess or mystery, but about the Roman way of life itself, where pleasure, power, and presentation were closely connected, forming a world that feels distant, yet strangely familiar in the way it blends human behavior with social expectation. As the evening in a Roman villa continues to unfold, the atmosphere begins to deepen in a way that feels gradual rather than sudden, where the earlier formality of the gathering slowly gives way to something more relaxed, yet still carefully controlled. And this transition is one of the most important parts of understanding these events, because nothing in Roman elite life truly happened without structure. Even moments that appeared spontaneous or indulgent were often shaped by expectation, by status, and by the unspoken rules that governed how people interacted within these spaces. The lamps burn lower, shadows stretch longer across the walls, and the conversations that once centered around politics, philosophy, or poetry begin to shift into something more personal, more playful, yet still layered with meaning. At this stage of the convivium, wine plays a central role, not simply as a drink, but as a tool that shapes the mood of the entire gathering. And unlike modern habits, Roman wine was almost always diluted with water, carefully mixed to maintain a balance between enjoyment and control, because losing control entirely was not seen as admirable among the elite. And yet, as the night progresses, the ratio could change, becoming stronger, allowing the atmosphere to loosen without completely collapsing into chaos. And this careful balance between control and release is something that defines these gatherings at every level. Entertainment also begins to evolve as the evening deepens, moving beyond simple music into more expressive performances, where dancers, actors, or entertainers may present scenes that are playful, suggestive, or symbolic, often drawing from mythology, where themes of love, desire, and transformation were already deeply embedded in Roman storytelling, and this allowed such performances to exist within a socially acceptable framework, where even intimate or provocative elements were not random, but connected to familiar cultural narratives that gave them context and meaning. Within this environment, the boundaries between observation and participation could become more fluid, but they were never entirely without limits, because Roman society placed great importance on reputation and self-presentation. And even in moments of indulgence, individuals remained aware of how they were being perceived by others in the room, especially in gatherings hosted by powerful figures, where every action could influence social standing, alliances, and future opportunities. This created a unique tension where people could engage in more relaxed or expressive behavior, but always within an invisible framework of awareness that shaped how far those behaviors could go. Another important layer within these gatherings is the presence of power dynamics, which were always present, even if not openly discussed, because Roman society was built on clear hierarchies that extended into every part of life, including leisure. And this meant that not everyone in the room experienced the gathering in the same way, where some were there as honored guests, others as entertainers, and others in roles that gave them little control over their own participation. And understanding this structure is essential to seeing these events clearly, because what might appear as shared enjoyment on the surface often reflected deeper inequalities beneath it. As the night continues, the setting itself begins to feel more intimate, not because it becomes uncontrolled, but because the rhythm of the gathering slows, conversations become quieter and more focused, and the structured elements of the evening give way to a more fluid interaction between guests, where storytelling, humor, and personal connection take a greater role. And within this atmosphere, the lines between performance and reality can sometimes blur, where gestures, expressions, and interactions carry multiple layers of meaning, shaped by both the immediate moment and the broader social context in which they exist. It is also important to understand that not every Roman gathering reached the same level of intensity or indulgence, because much depended on the host, the guests, and the purpose of the event. Where some evenings remained largely formal and intellectual, while others leaned more heavily into entertainment and sensory experience, and this variation reflects the diversity within Roman elite culture, where there was no single model for these gatherings, but rather a range of possibilities shaped by individual preference and social circumstance. What becomes increasingly clear as we remain within this scene is that these gatherings were not simply about pleasure in isolation, but about the careful blending of experience, identity, and social performance, where every element, from the food to the entertainment, to the interactions between guests, contributed to a larger narrative about who these people were and how they wished to be seen. And this narrative was just as important as the experience itself. Because in Roman society, appearance and reality were often closely intertwined. And as the night continues to stretch forward, with the soft glow of lamps illuminating faces and the quiet sound of voices filling the air, we begin to see that these gatherings were not chaotic or purely indulgent, as they are sometimes imagined today, but deeply structured environments where even the most intimate or expressive moments were part of a larger system of meaning, control, and social display, creating a world that feels both distant and surprisingly complex when viewed with patience and understanding. As the night moves further along and the rhythm of the gathering settles into something slower, deeper, and more immersive, the Roman convivium begins to reveal its most complex layer, where everything that has been building throughout the evening, food, wine, music, conversation, performance, and subtle shifts in behavior, comes together into a single, flowing experience that is less about individual moments and more about atmosphere itself, where guests are no longer simply attending an event, but existing within a carefully crafted environment designed to blur the boundaries between entertainment, identity, and social positioning. And it is within this space that many of the assumptions about Roman wildness begin to fade, replaced instead by a more nuanced understanding of how control and indulgence coexisted in ways that were both deliberate and deeply cultural. At this stage, the physical setting of the room begins to matter even more, where the arrangement of reclining couches, known as the triclinium, creates not only comfort, but also a subtle hierarchy, determining who is placed closer to the host, who is given prominence, and who remains slightly more distant, And this positioning affects interaction in ways that are quiet but powerful, influencing who speaks, who listens, and who becomes the center of attention at different moments throughout the night. And within this arrangement, even small gestures, such as the direction of a glance or the sharing of a cup, can carry meaning that extends beyond the immediate action. The presence of performers becomes more noticeable now, not because they suddenly appear, but because the mood of the gathering allows their role to expand, where music may shift from background accompaniment to something more central, where dancers move more freely within the space, and where theatrical elements may take on a more expressive tone, often drawing from themes that Romans were deeply familiar with: stories of gods, desire, transformation, and human complexity. Allowing these performances to exist within a cultural framework that made them both entertaining and meaningful at the same time, rather than purely provocative. Within this environment, the interaction between guests also evolves, becoming less structured and more fluid, where conversations move between topics with ease, and where individuals may form smaller groups within the larger gathering, sharing stories, jokes, or reflections that feel more personal. And it is within these smaller moments that the atmosphere of the evening becomes most apparent, where the balance between formality and relaxation is maintained not through strict rules, but through a shared understanding of how to exist within this space without disrupting its flow. It is also here that the role of the host becomes especially important, not as someone who controls every detail directly, but as someone who has shaped the environment in such a way that it can continue naturally, where the selection of guests, the arrangement of space, and the progression of the evening all reflect the host's influence, even when that influence is no longer immediately visible. And this ability to create an experience that feels effortless while remaining carefully designed was one of the key markers of status within Roman elite culture. At the same time, there remains an underlying awareness that not all aspects of the gathering are equal for everyone present, because while some guests experience the evening as a space of relaxation and expression, others, particularly those in service or performance roles, exist within a different framework, where their presence is part of the experience but their agency is limited. And this contrast is an essential part of understanding the full reality of these gatherings, because it reveals the deeper structures that supported the surface-level appearance of enjoyment and indulgence. As the night continues, there is a noticeable shift in energy, not toward chaos, but toward a softer and more introspective atmosphere, where the earlier liveliness gives way to quieter moments, where laughter becomes less frequent but more genuine, and where conversations carry a deeper tone, reflecting the passage of time and the gradual settling of the evening into its final stages. And within this calm, the gathering feels less like an event and more like a shared experience that exists briefly before dissolving back into the routines of daily life. What becomes most clear in this final phase of the evening is that these gatherings were never simply about excess or spectacle, but about the careful construction of an environment where multiple layers of Roman life, social, cultural, personal, and performative, could come together in a single space, allowing individuals to express, observe, and navigate their place within society in ways that were both subtle and complex. And it is this layering that gives these gatherings their lasting fascination, because they reveal not only how Romans lived, but how they understood themselves and the world around them. And as the lamps begin to dim further and the sounds of the gathering soften into quiet conversation and gentle movement, the experience slowly comes to rest, not with a sudden ending, but with a gradual fading. Where guests begin to leave, the space empties, and what remains is a lingering sense of something that was carefully created and just as carefully allowed to pass, leaving behind only memory, impression, and the quiet understanding of a world that balanced indulgence with structure in a way that still feels both distant and strangely familiar. As the gathering continues to stretch deeper into the night, what begins to stand out more clearly is not just what is happening within the room, but how carefully everything has been designed to create a certain feeling, a controlled atmosphere where nothing feels rushed and nothing feels accidental, where every element, from the lighting to the pacing of the evening, works together to guide the experience in a way that feels natural, yet is quietly intentional. And as you remain within this space, you begin to understand that Roman elite gatherings were not about losing control, but about managing it, about allowing moments of indulgence while still maintaining an underlying structure that kept everything within acceptable limits of social behavior. The deeper the night goes, the more subtle social signals begin to emerge, where the way someone speaks, the way they respond, even the way they hold themselves, becomes part of a quiet performance. Because in Roman society, gatherings like these were not only about enjoyment, but about observation, where individuals assessed one another's character, confidence, restraint, and awareness. And these impressions could carry real consequences beyond the evening itself, influencing relationships, alliances, and reputation in ways that extended far beyond the walls of the villa. At this stage, wine has softened the atmosphere enough that conversations begin to carry a different tone, where ideas flow more freely, humor becomes more relaxed, and people begin to reveal slightly more of themselves. Yet even here, there remains an invisible boundary, a shared understanding that while expression is allowed, it must not cross into behavior that would damage one's standing. And this delicate balance between openness and restraint is one of the most defining features of these gatherings, creating a space where people could explore different sides of themselves without fully stepping outside the expectations of their society. Entertainment, too, continues to evolve in tone rather than intensity, where performances may become more expressive, more symbolic, sometimes playing with themes that reflect human desire, relationships, and power, but always framed in a way that connects back to familiar cultural ideas, often drawn from mythology or storytelling, allowing these elements to exist within a recognized structure rather than appearing uncontrolled or out of place. And this connection to narrative is important because it transforms what might otherwise feel purely indulgent into something that carries meaning within the Roman worldview. What becomes increasingly clear is that these gatherings were as much about display as they were about experience, where the host demonstrated not only wealth, but taste, control, and understanding of social dynamics, and the guests, in turn, participated in this display through their behavior, their conversation, and their ability to move within the environment in a way that felt appropriate and refined. And this mutual awareness created a kind of shared performance where everyone played a role, whether consciously or not. At the same time, there is a growing sense of intimacy within the space, not necessarily in a physical sense, but in the way the environment allows for closer interaction, where smaller groups form, where conversations become more personal, and where the distance between individuals feels reduced. Yet even this intimacy exists within the broader structure of the gathering, never fully separate from the social context that defines it, and this layered experience is what makes these events so complex. because they combine personal interaction with public awareness in a way that is both subtle and deeply integrated. As the night begins to approach its later stages, there is a gradual shift toward calmness, where the earlier energy softens into something more reflective, where movement slows, voices lower, and the overall atmosphere becomes quieter, not because the gathering is ending abruptly, but because it is naturally settling, following a rhythm that has been present from the very beginning, guiding the evening from its formal opening through its more relaxed middle, and now into its gentle conclusion. And as you sit within this final phase, observing the quiet exchanges, the fading music, and the soft light of the remaining lamps, it becomes clear that what has taken place here is not simply a party in the modern sense, but a carefully structured social experience where every element has contributed to a larger expression of Roman life, where pleasure, power, culture, and identity have all been woven together into a single, continuous flow that feels both controlled and alive at the same time. As the night continues to drift forward, and the gathering settles into its deepest and most reflective phase, the atmosphere inside the Roman villa begins to feel almost suspended in time, where everything moves more slowly, more deliberately, and the earlier layers of performance, structure, and display soften into something that feels more personal, yet still deeply connected to the social framework that has guided the entire evening from the very beginning. And it is within this final stretch that the true nature of these gatherings becomes most visible, not as chaotic or uncontrolled indulgence, but as a carefully balanced experience where pleasure, identity, and power quietly coexist within a shared space that never fully loses its sense of order. At this stage, the physical environment itself begins to feel different, not because anything has changed dramatically, but because the perception of it has shifted, where the flickering lamplight now casts longer and softer shadows, where the sounds of conversation are lower and more focused, and where the overall rhythm of the room feels calmer, almost reflective, as if the gathering is gradually turning inward, allowing those present to experience the space not just as a social setting, but as something more intimate and immersive. And within this atmosphere, even small movements or gestures seem to carry more weight, more meaning, simply because there is less distraction and more attention. The interactions between guests also become more selective, where larger group conversations give way to quieter exchanges, where individuals speak more thoughtfully, and where the earlier need to present oneself begins to relax slightly, allowing glimpses of more genuine personality to emerge. Yet even here, there is never a complete loss of awareness, because in Roman society, especially among the elite, self-control and reputation remained essential at all times, and this constant awareness creates a unique tension where even moments that feel personal are still shaped by the understanding that they exist within a public, social framework. It is also during this phase that the deeper purpose of such gatherings becomes clearer, because beyond the visible elements of food, wine, and entertainment, these events functioned as spaces where relationships were strengthened, where alliances were quietly reinforced, and where individuals navigated their place within a complex social hierarchy. And this process did not require formal discussion or direct negotiation, but unfolded naturally through interaction, through presence, and through the subtle signals exchanged throughout the evening, making the entire experience both social and strategic at the same time. At the same time, there is an underlying awareness that what appears effortless is actually the result of careful preparation and control. where the host has orchestrated every detail in advance, from the selection of guests to the arrangement of the space, ensuring that the evening flows smoothly from one stage to the next without disruption. And this ability to create a seamless experience was itself a form of power, demonstrating not only wealth, but mastery over social dynamics, over atmosphere, and over the invisible structure that holds everything together. As the gathering moves closer to its natural conclusion, there is no sudden ending, no clear signal that the night is over, but rather a gradual fading, where guests begin to leave quietly, where the room slowly empties, and where the energy that once filled the space gently dissolves into silence, leaving behind only the memory of what has taken place. And this slow and unforced ending reflects the same careful balance that defined the entire evening, where nothing is abrupt, nothing is excessive, and everything follows a natural rhythm that feels both controlled and organic at the same time. What remains most striking, as everything settles into stillness, is the realization that these gatherings were never simply about indulgence in the way they are often imagined today, but about the careful blending of experience and identity, where every element served a purpose, where every moment contributed to a larger narrative, and where even the most intimate or expressive aspects were part of a structured environment that reflected the values, hierarchies, and cultural understanding of Roman society. And as the final lamps dim and the villa returns to quiet, the entire experience feels less like a fleeting event and more like a carefully constructed moment in time, where everything aligned just long enough to create something complete, something balanced, something that reveals not only how the Romans lived, but how they understood the relationship between pleasure, control, and the world around them. As the night has now fully passed its peak and the gathering rests in its quietest phase, what begins to emerge is not more action, but deeper understanding, where the entire experience can be seen clearly as a complete structure, something that was carefully built, carefully maintained, and then just as carefully allowed to dissolve back into silence. And as we remain within this final layer, the Roman world reveals one of its most important truths, that even moments of pleasure, intimacy, and indulgence were never separate from order, but existed within it, guided by it, and shaped by a system that valued balance over chaos and awareness over abandonment. The idea that these gatherings were simply uncontrolled or wild fades completely here, replaced instead by the realization that they were, in many ways, performances of control itself, where even the loosest moments were held within invisible boundaries that defined how far they could go. What becomes especially clear in this final reflection is how deeply connected these gatherings were to identity, where individuals were not just participating in an evening of entertainment, but expressing who they were within the structure of Roman society, where their behavior, their confidence, their restraint, and their ability to move naturally within the environment all contributed to how they were seen by others. And this makes every moment, even the quietest one, part of a larger social narrative that extended far beyond the walls of the villa and into the broader world of relationships, influence, and reputation. There is also a sense of contrast that becomes more visible now, where the surface of the gathering, with its beauty, comfort, and carefully arranged atmosphere, exists alongside deeper realities that are not always immediately visible, particularly the roles of those who made the evening possible, those who served, performed, or maintained the space. And this contrast reminds us that, While the experience may have felt seamless for some, it was built upon structures that were far more complex and not equally shared by everyone present, adding another layer to our understanding of what these gatherings truly represented. As the final moments of the night settle into stillness, the space itself begins to return to its original state, where the couches remain, the tables stand quietly, and the lamps fade one by one, leaving behind a sense of calm that feels almost complete, as if the entire experience has been carefully folded back into the world it came from, leaving no disruption, no excess, only a quiet memory of something that was fully contained within its own time and place. This sense of containment is important because it reflects how Roman society approached not only these gatherings, but life itself, with a preference for order, for balance, and for the careful management of experience. What we carry forward from this journey is not the exaggerated image often associated with these events, but a clearer, more grounded understanding of how they actually functioned, as spaces where multiple layers of Roman life came together, where pleasure and power were intertwined, where expression and control existed side by side, and where every element, from the smallest gesture to the overall structure of the evening, contributed to a larger and more meaningful whole. And so, as the villa falls completely silent and the night reaches its final stillness, the image of the gathering remains not as something chaotic or mysterious, but as something carefully balanced, something that reveals the depth of Roman culture in a way that feels calm, structured, and quietly fascinating, allowing us to step back with a sense of understanding that goes beyond assumption and into something much more real. As we continue to remain within this quiet afterglow of the Roman gathering, where the energy of the night has already passed, but its presence still lingers softly in the air, a deeper layer of understanding begins to unfold, one that is not about what happened during the evening itself, but about why such gatherings existed in the first place, and what they truly meant within the wider structure of Roman life. Because these events were never isolated moments of entertainment, but reflections of a society that carefully balanced discipline with indulgence, control with expression, and public identity with private experience, all within a framework that allowed these elements to coexist without breaking the order that defined Roman culture. In this world, leisure was not separate from power, and pleasure was not separate from status, because every action, every interaction, and every experience carried meaning beyond itself, shaping how individuals were perceived and how they positioned themselves within the social hierarchy. And this is what makes these gatherings so fascinating, because they reveal a society where even relaxation was structured, where even enjoyment followed patterns, and where even the most personal moments were influenced by the expectations of the community surrounding them. The Roman elite understood that influence was not only built through political action or public achievement, but also through presence, through the ability to host, to engage, and to create environments where others felt both comfortable and impressed. And this made gatherings like these an essential part of maintaining status, because they allowed individuals to demonstrate qualities that could not always be shown in formal settings, such as charm, wit, generosity, and control, all of which contributed to a broader image that extended far beyond a single evening. At the same time, these gatherings also served as spaces where cultural values were reinforced, where shared ideas about behavior, relationships, and social roles were quietly expressed and observed, allowing participants to both reflect and reaffirm their place within the system. and this process happened naturally without direct instruction, simply through the experience of being present and participating in the flow of the evening, making the gathering itself a kind of living expression of Roman identity. There is also an important awareness that these events, while appearing unified on the surface, contained many different experiences within them, depending on one's position, perspective, and role, because what felt like freedom to some could feel like obligation to others, and what appeared as enjoyment in one context could carry different meanings in another, and this layered reality adds depth to our understanding, showing that these gatherings were not simple or uniform, but complex environments shaped by multiple perspectives at once. As we continue to reflect within this quiet space where the physical event has already passed but its meaning continues to unfold, it becomes clear that the Roman approach to such gatherings was rooted in a deep understanding of human behavior, where people are not only driven by necessity or duty, but also by connection, by experience, and by the desire to be seen and understood within their social world. And these gatherings provided a structured way for all of these elements to come together without disrupting the balance that held society in place. And so, as the silence of the villa becomes complete and the memory of the evening settles gently into the past, what remains is not an image of excess or mystery, but a clearer and more grounded understanding of a world where even the most misunderstood aspects of life were part of a carefully ordered system, where nothing existed entirely outside of structure, and where even moments of indulgence were shaped by a deeper logic that defined how Romans lived, interacted, and understood themselves within the world around them. As we continue further into this quiet reflection, where the gathering itself has long ended but its meaning continues to unfold slowly and deeply, the Roman world begins to feel even more complete, as if everything we have observed is now settling into a larger understanding, where these gatherings are no longer seen as isolated events, but as part of a continuous system that shaped how people lived, interacted, and understood their place within society. And as we remain within this calm and steady perspective, it becomes clear that what made these experiences so powerful was not any single moment, but the way everything worked together to create something balanced, controlled, and deeply expressive at the same time. One of the most important realizations that emerges here is how closely these gatherings were tied to the concept of control, not just external control over the environment, but internal control over behavior, emotion, and presence. Because in Roman culture, the ability to enjoy without losing composure was seen as a sign of strength, and this idea shaped the entire structure of these events, where even as the atmosphere became more relaxed, there remained an expectation that individuals would maintain awareness, restraint, and dignity, creating a space where indulgence existed, but never completely overtook order. At the same time, there is a deeper layer of human behavior that becomes visible when we look closely, where these gatherings allowed people to step slightly outside their daily roles, not in a way that broke the system, but in a way that explored it, where conversations could become more open, where interactions could feel more fluid, and where individuals could express different aspects of themselves, all while remaining within the boundaries that defined acceptable behavior. And this balance between expression and limitation is what gave these events their unique character, allowing them to feel both freeing and controlled at the same time. There is also a quiet rhythm to how these gatherings existed within the broader flow of life, where they were not constant or overwhelming, but occasional, carefully timed moments that stood out against the routines of daily existence, providing a contrast that made them more meaningful. And this rhythm reflects a deeper understanding within Roman culture, where life was not meant to be lived at a single level of intensity, but through a balance of activity and rest, of structure and release, of discipline and enjoyment. As we continue to sit within this stillness, where the memory of the gathering has become softer and more distant, it becomes clear that the fascination surrounding these events in modern times often comes from misunderstanding, from seeing them only through the lens of excess or curiosity, rather than through the lens of structure, culture, and meaning that actually define them. And when we shift our perspective in this way, the image changes completely, becoming less about mystery and more about understanding, less about exaggeration and more about reality. What remains most striking is how human these experiences feel, even across such a vast distance in time, where despite the differences in culture, language, and social structure, the underlying desire for connection, for shared experience, and for moments that break the routine of everyday life remains familiar, reminding us that while the details may change, the deeper patterns of human behavior continue to echo across history in ways that feel both distant and recognizable. And as the medieval-like calm of this Roman world settles completely into silence, leaving behind only the soft impression of what once took place within those marble walls, the journey itself begins to feel complete, not because there is nothing more to explore, but because everything has come together into a clear and steady understanding, where the reality of these gatherings stands revealed not as something chaotic or mysterious, but as something carefully shaped, deeply structured, and quietly fascinating in the way it reflects the balance between control and indulgence that defined Roman life. As we continue moving gently through this final stretch of understanding, the Roman world now feels fully revealed in its quiet complexity, where the gatherings we once imagined as something mysterious or exaggerated have transformed into something far more structured, far more intentional, and far more connected to the deeper rhythms of life. And as we sit within this calm perspective, it becomes clear that these events were never just about what happened inside the room, but about how those moments fit into a much larger system of identity, reputation, and social balance that defined the Roman way of living. What begins to stand out now is how carefully Roman society managed contrast, where moments of indulgence were always balanced by expectations of discipline, where relaxation existed alongside responsibility, and where even the most expressive parts of life were held within a framework that prevented them from becoming disruptive. And this balance is what allowed such gatherings to exist without threatening the order of society, because they were not separate from that order, but part of it, carefully contained within boundaries that were understood by everyone present. There is also a growing sense that these gatherings functioned as a kind of mirror, reflecting not only the host's status and taste, but also the behavior and character of the guests themselves, where every interaction became part of a quiet evaluation, not in a harsh or obvious way, but in a subtle and ongoing process where people observed one another, formed impressions, and carried those impressions forward into future interactions, making the gathering not just a moment of experience, but part of a continuous social process that extended far beyond the night itself. At the same time, we begin to notice how much of this experience depended on shared understanding, on unspoken rules that guided behavior without needing to be stated directly, where people knew how to act, how far to go, and when to hold back. creating a space that felt fluid and natural, yet remained carefully controlled beneath the surface. And this shared awareness is what allowed the gathering to maintain its balance, ensuring that even as the atmosphere became more relaxed, it never lost its sense of structure. There is also a quiet realization that what may seem unusual or distant to us now was, for the Romans, simply part of life, part of a system they understood and moved within naturally. And this difference in perspective is important, because it reminds us that history is not just about events, but about how those events were experienced and understood by the people who lived through them. And when we begin to see things through that lens, the world becomes less foreign and more familiar in its underlying patterns. As the final moments of this reflection unfold, the entire image of the Roman gathering feels calm, complete, and fully settled, where nothing is exaggerated, nothing is chaotic, and everything exists within a steady and balanced flow that reflects the values and structures of the society that created it. And within this stillness, the true nature of these events becomes clear, not as something extreme or mysterious, but as something carefully shaped, deeply cultural, and quietly revealing of how Romans lived, interacted, and understood themselves. And as the silence returns completely, leaving behind only the soft memory of voices, light and movement within those grand marble spaces, the journey itself feels finished, not with a sharp ending, but with a gentle understanding that what we have explored was not just a series of gatherings, but a window into a world where even the most misunderstood aspects of life were part of a larger, balanced, and deeply structured whole. As we continue further, without closing anything yet, staying inside this slow and detailed flow, the Roman world begins to open even more deeply, revealing layers that are often completely missed when these gatherings are simplified or exaggerated. Because what truly made these events unique was not just what happened inside the room, but the invisible structure surrounding them, the expectations carried by every guest, the silent rules guiding behavior, and the constant awareness that every moment was being observed, interpreted, and remembered long after the night itself had ended. And when you begin to see it this way, the entire atmosphere changes from something chaotic into something almost carefully choreographed, where even spontaneity feels guided by an unseen rhythm. If you imagine remaining in that villa just a little longer, not leaving when others begin to rise, but staying back quietly, you begin to notice details that are easy to miss during the height of the gathering, where servants move silently through the space restoring order, where leftover cups and plates are cleared without disrupting the calm, and where the room slowly returns to its original state, almost as if nothing ever happened. And this transition itself tells us something important, that these events were never meant to leave disorder behind, but to exist within a controlled moment and then disappear cleanly, without disturbing the balance of everyday life. At the same time, outside the villa, the Roman world continues as normal. Streets quiet, guards on duty, distant sounds of the city settling into night. And this contrast between the controlled environment inside and the structured world outside reflects something deeper about Roman society, where even moments of private indulgence were not separate from the public system, but existed within it, supported by it, and shaped by the same values that governed everything else. And this connection between private and public life is what makes these gatherings so complex, because they were never truly private in the way we understand today, but part of a broader social framework. that extended beyond the walls of any single space. As we continue to reflect, another layer begins to appear, one that is more psychological, where these gatherings allowed individuals to navigate different versions of themselves, not by completely changing who they were, but by adjusting how they expressed themselves within a safe and structured environment, where confidence, humor, charm, and control could all be displayed in ways that were not always possible in more formal settings. And this ability to move between different expressions of identity was an important part of Roman elite life, allowing individuals to strengthen their social position not only through power, but through presence. There is also a subtle awareness that these gatherings functioned as a form of communication, not through direct statements, but through atmosphere, through behavior, through the choices made by the host and the responses of the guests, where everything from the quality of the food to the tone of conversation sent signals about wealth, taste, alliances, and intentions, creating a space where meaning was constantly being exchanged without needing to be spoken openly. And this silent communication is one of the most fascinating aspects of these events, because it shows how deeply social interaction was embedded into every part of Roman life. As we stay within this calm continuation, without rushing toward an ending, it becomes clear that the real power of these gatherings was not in any single moment of indulgence, but in the way they brought together multiple layers of human experience into one controlled environment, where pleasure, performance, observation, and strategy all existed at the same time, creating something that felt natural on the surface but was deeply structured underneath. And this balance is what allowed these events to exist repeatedly without breaking the social order that defined Roman life. And even now, as everything feels quiet, as if the night has already passed, there is still a sense that the experience is not fully over, because its effects continue beyond the moment itself, carried forward in memory, in reputation, in the subtle shifts in relationships that will unfold in the days that follow, showing us that these gatherings were never limited to a single night, but part of an ongoing process that connected people, shaped perceptions, and reinforced the complex structure of Roman society in ways that were quiet, lasting, and deeply significant. As we continued to remain inside this slow, continuous flow, without closing the journey, the Roman world begins to reveal one of its deepest layers, something that sits quietly beneath everything we have already explored. And that is the idea that these gatherings were not just events, but carefully managed moments of controlled freedom, where people were allowed to move slightly beyond their usual boundaries, but never so far that the structure of society itself was threatened. And this balance between freedom and control is what gave these evenings their unique energy, where everything felt more open, yet nothing truly escaped the invisible framework that held it together. The more you stay within this space, the more you begin to feel that nothing here was accidental, not even the moments that seemed spontaneous, because even spontaneity was shaped by expectation, by culture, and by the shared understanding of how far things could go. If you imagine the same villa on another night, with a different host or a slightly different group of guests, you would begin to notice how flexible these gatherings could be within their structure, where the tone of the evening could shift depending on who was present, where some gatherings might lean more toward conversation and philosophy, while others might focus more on entertainment and sensory experience. Yet in all cases, the same underlying system remained in place, guiding behavior, shaping interaction, and ensuring that everything stayed within a recognizable pattern. And this adaptability, is what allowed these gatherings to remain a consistent part of Roman life without becoming repetitive, because each one felt slightly different while still following the same invisible rules. There is also a deeper social function that becomes clearer here, where these gatherings acted as a space for testing boundaries, not in a reckless way, but in a controlled and observed manner, where individuals could explore how far they could go in expression, humor, or interaction without damaging their reputation. And this process allowed people to better understand both themselves and others, creating a kind of social awareness that extended far beyond the evening itself, influencing how they would act in future situations, how they would form alliances, and how they would navigate the complex hierarchy of Roman society. At the same time, there is a quiet realization that much of what happened in these spaces depended on shared trust. Not trust in the sense of secrecy, but trust in the system itself, in the understanding that everyone present knew the boundaries, knew the expectations, and would act within them. And this shared trust is what allowed the environment to feel relaxed without becoming unstable. Because even in moments where behavior became more expressive, there was always an underlying confidence that the structure would hold. As we continue to observe, the idea of reputation becomes even more central, because in Roman culture, how one was remembered mattered just as much as what one actually did, and gatherings like these played a significant role in shaping that memory, where impressions formed during a single evening could influence how a person was seen for a long time afterward. And this added another layer of awareness to every action, every word, every interaction, making the entire experience both social and strategic at the same time. There is also something deeply human that begins to emerge here, something that connects this distant world to our own, where despite all the structure, all the hierarchy, and all the cultural differences, the core desire for connection, for shared experience, and for moments that feel slightly outside the ordinary remains the same, reminding us that while the form may change across time, the underlying patterns of human behavior remain surprisingly consistent. And as we remain within this calm and unbroken continuation, not moving toward an ending but simply allowing the understanding to deepen further, the Roman gathering now feels fully alive in a different way, not through action, but through awareness, where every layer we have explored continues to exist together, forming a complete picture of a world that was far more structured, far more intentional, and far more complex than it is often imagined to be. As we continue to stay within this slow, uninterrupted flow, allowing the Roman world to reveal itself layer by layer without rushing toward any conclusion, a deeper clarity begins to settle in, where everything we have explored no longer feels like separate observations, but part of one continuous system. A system where gatherings like these were not exceptions to daily life, but extensions of it, where the same values that governed politics, family, and public behavior quietly shaped even the most relaxed and intimate environments, creating a world where nothing truly existed outside of structure, only different expressions within it. The more we remain inside this perspective, the more we begin to understand that what made these gatherings powerful was not what they allowed people to escape from, but how they allowed people to exist within the system in a slightly expanded way, where expression could stretch but never break. In this stage of understanding, attention shifts even further away from surface-level assumptions and toward the deeper mechanics of how these gatherings functioned over time, not just in a single night, but as part of a repeated and evolving pattern, where individuals attended many such evenings throughout their lives. gradually learning how to navigate them with more confidence, more awareness, and more control, refining their behavior in subtle ways that improved their social standing, strengthened their relationships, and deepened their understanding of the world they were part of. And this repetition is important because it shows that these gatherings were not isolated experiences, but part of a long-term process of social development. There is also a growing sense of how much of this world depended on observation rather than instruction, where people learned not through direct teaching, but through watching others, through noticing what was accepted, what was admired, and what was quietly avoided. And this form of learning created a culture where behavior was shaped collectively, where the group itself reinforced the boundaries without needing to state them openly, allowing the system to function smoothly without constant intervention. As we remain within this quiet and steady reflection, another layer becomes visible, one that reveals how these gatherings allowed for the careful management of emotion, where feelings such as desire, curiosity, amusement, and even competition were not suppressed, but guided into forms that could be expressed without disrupting social balance, creating an environment where human nature was acknowledged rather than denied, but always within a structure that prevented it from becoming overwhelming. And this balance between expression and control is what gave these gatherings their stability, allowing them to exist repeatedly without creating lasting disorder. There is also an awareness of time itself, how the pacing of the evening, from its structured beginning to its relaxed middle and its quiet ending, mirrored a larger rhythm that existed throughout Roman life, where everything followed a flow, a progression that allowed for movement and change without sudden disruption. And this rhythm created a sense of continuity, where each gathering felt complete within itself, yet also connected to those that came before and those that would come after. At the same time, the presence of contrast continues to exist quietly beneath everything, where the smooth and controlled experience of the elite stands alongside the unseen effort required to maintain it, reminding us that what appears effortless is often supported by structures that are not immediately visible. And this contrast adds depth to our understanding, showing that these gatherings were not simple or uniform, but layered and complex, shaped by multiple realities existing at once. And as we continue to remain within this calm, uninterrupted understanding without moving toward an ending, the Roman world now feels fully formed, not as a collection of exaggerated ideas, but as a balanced and deeply structured system where even the most misunderstood aspects of life were part of a larger, carefully maintained order, allowing us to see these gatherings not as something distant or strange, but as something that reflects a consistent and thoughtful approach to how life was experienced, shared, and understood. As we continue to move forward within this same calm and uninterrupted flow, allowing the Roman world to remain open and unfolding, rather than closing it too quickly, what begins to settle more clearly is a sense that these gatherings were not just shaped by rules or expectations, but by a deep understanding of human nature itself, where the Romans recognized that people are drawn toward connection, toward expression, toward moments that feel slightly outside the ordinary, and instead of resisting these tendencies, they created environments where those impulses could exist safely within a structure that maintained balance. And this is perhaps one of the most important insights we gain from looking closely at these events, because it shows a society that did not try to eliminate complexity, but to organize it. Within this understanding, the idea of control becomes even more refined, not as something rigid or forceful, but as something flexible, something that adapts to the flow of the evening, allowing the atmosphere to change naturally while still keeping everything within a stable framework. And this flexibility is what allowed these gatherings to feel alive, to feel responsive, to feel genuine, even though they were built upon a carefully maintained system of expectations and awareness. And it is this balance that made them sustainable, allowing them to exist repeatedly without collapsing into disorder or losing their meaning. There is also a deeper sense of continuity that becomes visible here, where these gatherings were not isolated moments of experience, but part of a larger rhythm that extended across time, where individuals carried what they learned from one evening into the next, gradually building a sense of confidence, familiarity, and understanding that allowed them to move more naturally within these spaces. And this continuity created a culture where behavior was refined over time, where social awareness deepened, and where the ability to navigate complex environments became an important part of personal development. At the same time, there is a quiet realization that much of what made these gatherings effective was not what was visible, but what was understood without being spoken. The shared sense of boundaries, the mutual awareness of roles, and the collective agreement to maintain the balance that allowed the experience to continue smoothly. And this unspoken understanding is what gave these events their stability, because it meant that control did not need to be enforced directly, but existed naturally within the behavior of those present. As we remain within this still and reflective space, the Roman gathering now feels less like a specific event and more like a system in motion, something that continues beyond any single night, beyond any single group of people, existing as a pattern that repeats, adapts, and evolves over time, always maintaining its core structure while allowing for variation and change. And this sense of ongoing movement gives the entire concept a feeling of depth, where what we are observing is not just a moment in history but a way of life. There is also something quietly revealing in how these gatherings balanced appearance and reality, where what was shown on the surface often carried deeper meanings beneath it, where gestures, interactions, and even moments of relaxation were part of a larger expression of identity and status. And this layering of meaning is what makes these events so complex, because they cannot be understood fully by looking only at what is visible, but require a deeper awareness of the context in which they existed. And as we continue to remain within this long and steady flow, without rushing toward an ending, the Roman world now feels fully expanded, not as something exaggerated or misunderstood, but as something carefully structured, deeply human, and quietly sophisticated, where even the most curious or misunderstood aspects of life were part of a larger system that allowed people to experience, express, and understand themselves within a world that valued both control and connection at the same time. As we continue moving forward in this same slow and unbroken flow, without closing the journey too quickly, the Roman world now begins to feel even more complete, as if every layer we have explored is settling into a single, connected understanding where nothing stands alone and nothing feels exaggerated anymore. But instead, everything exists as part of a carefully balanced system that allowed people to experience life in a way that was both structured and expressive at the same time. And as we remain inside this perspective, what becomes clearer than ever is that these gatherings were not moments of escape from society, but reflections of it, shaped by the same values, the same hierarchies, and the same awareness that defined Roman life in every other setting. At this point, the idea of atmosphere itself becomes important. Not just what happened during the gathering, but how it felt to be inside it, where the slow pacing of the evening, the steady presence of others, and the gradual shift from formality to relaxation created an environment that allowed people to move naturally between different states of behavior, not by forcing change, but by allowing it to happen gradually. And this gradual transition is what gave these gatherings their unique rhythm, where nothing felt sudden, nothing felt out of place, and everything unfolded in a way that felt almost inevitable once it had begun. There is also a deeper awareness now of how much these experiences depended on timing, not just in the sense of when events occurred, but in how long they lasted, how slowly they progressed, and how carefully they were allowed to develop. Because the Romans understood that experience is shaped not only by what happens, but by how it unfolds over time. And this understanding is reflected in the way these gatherings moved from one phase to another, creating a sense of continuity that held everything together without the need for abrupt changes or clear transitions. At the same time, there is a quiet recognition that these gatherings allowed for a kind of controlled transformation, where individuals could temporarily shift their behavior, their tone, or their level of expression without losing their identity, where the environment supported change without requiring it. And this ability to move between different states within a single setting reflects a deeper understanding of human nature, where people are not fixed in one way of being, but capable of adapting to different contexts while still remaining connected to who they are. As we continue to observe, another layer becomes visible, one that shows how these gatherings were part of a larger cycle, where each event influenced the next, where impressions carried forward, where relationships developed over time, and where the experience of one evening became part of a longer story that extended beyond any single moment. And this sense of continuity gives these gatherings a kind of lasting presence, where they are not forgotten once they end, but remain active in the social world through memory and perception. There is also something quietly revealing in how these gatherings managed complexity, where multiple layers of experience, social, emotional, cultural, and structural, all existed at the same time without overwhelming the system, because each layer was balanced by the others, creating a stable environment where even more expressive moments could exist without causing disruption. And this balance is what made these events sustainable, allowing them to remain part of Roman life without becoming excessive or unstable. And as we remain within this calm and continuous reflection, without rushing toward a final conclusion, the Roman gathering now feels fully understood, not as something extreme or misunderstood, but as something carefully shaped, deeply structured, and quietly sophisticated, where every element, from the smallest interaction to the overall flow of the evening, contributed to a larger system that allowed people to experience both control and expression within a single balanced environment. As we continue forward without breaking this calm and continuous flow, allowing the Roman world to remain open and breathing rather than forcing it into an ending too quickly, everything we have explored now begins to feel fully connected, as if each layer, structure, behavior, atmosphere, control, and expression has slowly merged into one complete understanding where nothing feels separate anymore. And within this stillness, the true nature of these gatherings becomes clearer than ever, not as something exaggerated or mysterious, but as something carefully designed to reflect a society that understood how to manage complexity without losing balance, how to allow expression without losing control, and how to create environments where human behavior could unfold naturally while still remaining within a stable framework. What becomes especially visible at this stage is how these gatherings existed within a larger rhythm of Roman life, not standing apart from it, but moving in harmony with it, where periods of activity were followed by moments of rest, where public duties were balanced by private experiences, and where the intensity of these evenings was always contained within a wider structure that ensured life continued smoothly beyond them. And this rhythm is what prevented these gatherings from becoming overwhelming or disruptive, allowing them to exist as part of a continuous cycle, rather than as isolated extremes. There is also a deeper sense now of how much these environments relied on awareness. Not just awareness of others, but awareness of self, where individuals constantly adjusted their behavior based on the space around them, reading subtle signals, responding to shifts in tone, and maintaining a presence that felt appropriate to the moment. And this constant adjustment created a dynamic that felt alive and responsive, where nothing was fixed, yet everything remained within control, forming a balance that was both delicate and strong at the same time. As we remain within this slow and reflective state, another layer becomes clear, one that reveals how these gatherings were not only about the present moment, but about continuity across time, where the impressions formed during one evening would carry forward into future interactions, shaping relationships, influencing decisions, and contributing to a broader narrative that extended far beyond the walls of the villa. And this continuity is what gives these events their lasting significance, because they were not temporary experiences, but part of an ongoing social process that connected people across multiple moments and settings. There is also something quietly powerful in how these gatherings balanced visibility and subtlety, where everything was seen, yet not everything was openly acknowledged, where meaning existed beneath the surface of actions and interactions, creating a layered experience that could be understood differently depending on one's perspective. And this subtlety is what allowed these environments to function smoothly, because it reduced the need for direct control, replacing it with shared understanding and mutual awareness. At the same time, the Roman world itself now feels calmer, more distant yet more complete, as if everything that once moved within it has gently settled into place, where the energy of these gatherings has faded into quiet memory, but their structure, their meaning, and their influence remain present, not as something active, but as something understood, something that continues to exist within the larger flow of history without needing to be constantly seen. And as we continue to remain within this stillness without forcing a sharp ending, the journey itself feels less like something that concludes and more like something that slowly dissolves into understanding, where what we carry forward is not just information, but a clearer sense of how a society once balanced its desires, its structures, and its identity in a way that feels both distant and deeply human at the same time, allowing us to step away, not with exaggeration or confusion, but with a calm and grounded awareness of what these gatherings truly were. As we gently arrive at the final stretch of this long and unbroken journey, everything we have explored now settles into a complete and quiet understanding, where the Roman world no longer feels distant, exaggerated, or misunderstood, but instead feels structured, balanced, and deeply human. And as we remain within this calm and steady reflection, the gatherings we once imagined as chaotic or mysterious now reveal themselves fully as carefully shaped environments where every element, every movement, every interaction Every shift in tone was part of a larger system that allowed people to experience both expression and control without ever losing the balance that defined their society. In this final view, what becomes most important is not any single moment from these gatherings, but the overall design behind them. The way they were built to guide experience from beginning to end, starting with structure, moving into gradual relaxation, and then returning again to stillness, creating a complete cycle that mirrored the broader rhythm of Roman life itself, where nothing was left unresolved, nothing was allowed to spill beyond its place, and everything existed within a flow that felt natural, controlled, and continuous at the same time. The individuals who moved through these spaces were not simply participants in an event, but part of a larger social pattern, where their behavior, their awareness, and their ability to navigate the environment all contributed to how they were understood within their world. And this made every gathering more than just an evening, turning it into a moment of subtle influence where relationships were shaped, impressions were formed, and identities were quietly expressed in ways that extended far beyond what was visible on the surface. There is also a deep sense of clarity now, where the contrast between modern imagination and historical reality becomes fully visible, showing us that what is often portrayed as uncontrolled indulgence was in fact something much more refined, much more intentional, and much more connected to the values of the society in which it existed, where even the most expressive elements were guided by structure, and where nothing truly existed outside of the system that held everything together. As the final moments of this reflection unfold, the Roman villa feels quiet once more, the lamps dimmed, the space empty, yet still carrying the presence of everything that once took place within it. And this stillness is not an ending in a dramatic sense, but a return to balance, a return to the calm state from which the entire experience began, completing the cycle in a way that feels smooth, natural, and fully resolved. What remains with us is not the image of excess, but the understanding of a world that knew how to manage experience, how to create environments where human behavior could unfold without breaking structure, and how to maintain balance even in moments that seemed, on the surface, more relaxed or expressive. And this understanding allows us to see these gatherings not as something strange or distant, but as part of a broader human pattern, where societies find ways to balance control and freedom in ways that reflect their own values and beliefs. And so, as this journey comes to its gentle and complete close, we step away from the Roman world with a calm and grounded perspective, carrying with us not myths or exaggerations, but a clearer and more thoughtful understanding of what these gatherings truly were, how they functioned, and what they reveal about a civilization that carefully blended structure with experience in a way that still feels quietly fascinating even today. If you enjoyed this long, calm journey into history, then don't forget to like the video and subscribe, so more deep and immersive stories can continue to unfold, one peaceful chapter at a time.